But the mobile, porous, and regulatory dimensions of the new walls suggest a more complex story. The violent effects of economic globalization producing border quandaries are evident, for example, in the production of Central Americans so desperately poor that they would risk their lives, those of family members, or permanent absence from families, to become woefully paid illegal day laborers in the U.S., or in the phenomenon of Bangladeshis who would trudge to the slums of Calcutta for better prospects. Neoliberalism's lightning-fast relocations of the scenes of production, rapidly rising and falling currencies and prices, and other vicissitudes of economic life together produce what Hannah Arendt analyzed 50 years ago as masses of stateless persons reduced to bare life, so politically untethered, so disqualified, so little anointed by political markers of humanness, that the new walls appear as a kind of cage against their animal-like invasion. And it's telling that one of the leading screeds against immigration in the U.S. was authored by neoconservative Pat Buchanan and is called The Third World Invasion. Indeed, if there remains any validity to the humanist and democratic conceit about speech, recognition, law, and freedom as markers of the distinctively human, these mute barricades, these walls, eschew these capacities both in the beings that they would repel and in the power they represent. They tacitly snub the universal humanism promulgated by the putatively global moral discourse of democracy and human rights. But if walls respond to certain effects of neoliberal globalization, they're also sometimes part of its regulatory apparatuses. Far from being antithetical to economic concerns, the new walls crudely iterate a certain regulatory scheme for global capital. They govern or attempt to govern flows of labor and goods while permitting the unrestricted flow of capital. Even the most physically ominous new walls, if they could fulfill their aims, aim to regulate rather than bar illegal and legal immigrant labor. And you can see this in the enormous variation in the numbers of undocumented Mexican immigrants and enforcement actions against U.S. employers according to expansions and contractions in the U.S. economy. You see it in the fact that Israel still admits tens of thousands of illegal Palestinian workers as well as workers with permits despite its official end to that policy 5 years ago. In both the Israeli and the U.S. cases, the same labor has actually been utilized to build the walls that the barriers were then supposed to bar. And in fact, in the U.S. case, there's one particularly remarkable case of a fence company that has 3 times been busted for using illegal labor for all kinds of purposes, including to build the wall, and simply takes the fine and then goes on doing it because it's worth the price. These walls, in other words, are aimed at producing the very liminality between law and non-law that was required by flexible production. The intersection of sovereign law and sovereign exception in the wall, along with the wall's inconsistent texture, facilitates the production of a global labor force that is neither organized nor protected. It increases the number of usable and disposable subjects who are not citizens. Now, if neoliberal economics requires regulated rather than unrestricted flows of everything except finance capital, the other half of the question, the security question, is does security really drive toward barriers? This too is questionable. Security today requires not just containment, but movement, flow, openness, availability to inspection. Nothing is more dangerous than potential sedition or insurgency hidden in closed cells on the one hand, or than a stubbornly immovable, inassimilable, or otherwise fixed and insulated minority population on the other. Security requires not only the ability to survey, inspect, process, count, record, but also to channel, to transfer, to relocate, or sometimes simply to drive out certain populations. So, if both national economy and security concerns require porous barriers and regulated flows through them, it's important to note that these two sets of concerns, security and economy, do interpenetrate as legitimating discourses in the production and promotion of walling. For example, even as the U.S.-Mexico wall is obviously aimed at the impoverished south of the border populations lured by North American wage rates required by the North American economy, both politicians and citizen groups often promote it on national security grounds. Terrorists love open borders. Remember 9/11, sloganizes one group on behalf of the U.S.-Mexico wall, and you can see hundreds of these billboards across the southwestern part of the United States. And one reads on a website by a group promoting the walling of the entire border. It's a website called weneedafence.com. The following. In addition to the hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants from Central and South America, there are several hundreds, perhaps thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of illegal aliens from countries that sponsor terrorism or harbor terrorists entering the U.S. each year across our border with Mexico. It's simply not true. That is not the border through which so-called terrorists or alleged terrorists enter the U.S. Similar offenses, the website continues, in Israel have reduced terrorist attacks by up to 95%. WeNeedAFence.com exemplifies the mobilization of security concerns, fear, on behalf of economic and demographic ones. It represents the merging into one figure of alien danger, economic, terroristic, and others, that mobilizes the desire for walling. But what one can also see in this merger are operations, again, of racism and xenophobia that the walls themselves mobilize in melding these two concerns. And I want to consider now a poem posted on their website. It's not a very good poem, so don't get excited if you're in literature, but it's a telling poem. This poem has been on the WeNeedAFence.com website now for almost half a dozen years. It's their pride and joy. It's written by one of their members. And again, as I said, it's not a great poem, but it contains some really important material for us to think about. For those of you familiar with Dr. Seuss, it has a little bit of a Dr. Seuss rhythm, so be prepared. Take some bricks and build a wall, make it solid, strong, and tall. Let it stretch from gulf to sea, that safer at home we all may be. Build it wide from rim to rim, so terrorists and smugglers can't sneak in, and make it deep, secure from holes through which flow the drugs that wreck our souls. Stop the drug trade in its tracks, keep us safe from terrorist attacks, and let it stand the test of time. I pray, keep safe this land of mine. So far we have terrorists, smugglers, we have drugs, all fused. Now watch as the poem turns its address directly to the state. Consider this, that it's your job to keep those out who would rape and rob. So now we have rapists and robbers added to the mix. From this great cause you cannot run, while so many of us have lost daughter and son. You ask our children to serve and fight. They trust their leaders to do what's right. And what's right is this, it's easy to see. Here's the Dr. Seuss. It's plain and simple as 1, 2, 3. If you'll keep us safe in the war on terror, an open border is a fatal error. Now, it's easy to dismiss as reactionary ignorance or comedy the author's metonymic chain of terrorism, smuggling, drugs, rape, robbery, and illegal immigrants on one side, and then the metonymic chain of solidity, strength, height, Christian prayer, and children righteously sacrificed in wars of freedom on the other. But such metonymy, in which all of those bad things are lined up on one side and all of those innocent, good, pure, noble, and righteous things are lined up on the other, is critical, I want to suggest, to contemporary nationalist and post-nationalist projects, ranging from post-9/11 American military conquests in the Mideast to the Israeli occupation of Palestine to a walled European Union. The arch and diametric oppositions in this poem distract from the fusions and confusions of inside-outside, military and police, civilians and soldiers, laborers and enemy insurgents, the confusions and fusions of this sort that are at the site of walls. They also distract from the paradox of walled democracy that they express. And